Hello and welcome to another Atypical Philosopher video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is a Ukraine War Update Extra video, one that I recorded yesterday. It's Christmas Eve, so I didn't know that I'd get the time today. Well, I'm actually doing a regular job as well on Christmas Eve. So there you go. Where shall we start? There's so much to talk about again. There's actually two videos I want to show you so much of. And I'm going to have to think carefully about what parts I show you because otherwise it would be just crazily long. This first video is about Ukrainian forces on the area of Kinburn Spit. And I'm going to, obviously, as I normally do, read out the subtitles for you for those who are listening to this. So this is interesting because it gives the sense that there is no Ukrainian activity on Kinburn Spit or Kinburn Peninsula. Just to give you an idea of where that is, if we come out on my map here, it's down in Kherson. I mean, most of you will know this already, of course. Down in Kherson, this area, and it's the peninsula here. Now, these guys in this video are somewhere along here, and they are in a trench network that has a direct view of this peninsula, and they are able to spot for artillery and also keep observations out for Russian movements and anything coming over, including drones and KH-101 and cruise missiles and what have you. So the idea is that the Ukrainians aren't over on the spit. However, it doesn't on the peninsula. However, it doesn't necessarily mean they aren't. There's operational security over there, so maybe they're not allowed to say it or they don't know. All that aside, the prima facie, which is kind of the on the surface evidence, appears to be that the Ukrainians aren't operational on the peninsula. So what does this first guy? What does one of these guys say? In our area of responsibility, I'll go through that again. In our area of responsibility, we are watching over. I think they have around 700 people and also armored vehicles, Tigers, Urals. They are strengthening the shoreline of the estuary, mining the sea, carrying out observation. They're working at our sector. The distance of up to 20 kilometers allow them to strike mainly from grads. Also, ship missiles coming out of underwater vessels and ships. Their KH series missiles are also flying over. Our air defense is working, trying to take down as many as possible. Boom. Look, my dear. So this is, that was some noise going on from the actual recording. Is our artillery shelling the Kinburn Spit? Our artillery is artillery is always working, destroying ammo caches, strikes at their positions and troop accumulations. So have a look here. I mean, this is a very nicely built, could be good for PR. I don't know whether all their trench networks look as well kept as this one. The main task is defense of positions, observation, locating the enemy, adjusting artillery, working at airborne targets if necessary. What were you able to take down? And this one guy says, Shaheeds, mainly Shaheeds. Tell us, how was it? It was after the first delivery of drones from Iran to Russia. There was a mass launch. At first they used to fly over us, but after taking down 10, 15, 20 drones, they started looking for other paths. They tried to fly over the shore at Kinburn Spit towards Mykolaiv. Some flew over, but not far. It shows that the experience of taking down airborne targets, including Shaheeds, is vast, developed. Those working are all used to this type of weapon. Right now, I'm observing the Spit. Visibility is pretty good, you could say. I'm not observing the orcs yet. That's what they call the Russians. Have you had accidents when you observed the movements of the vehicles? Yes, the weather was such that it was well visible. I need to just make sure I've read that. Have you had accidents when you observed the movement of vehicles, people? I don't know if that's the correct translation. Yes, the weather was such that it was well visible. We provided the information and a strike followed. So accidents must mean sort of attacks on the Russian positions. So they provided the information and then the strikes followed afterwards. What did you see then? I saw detonation. And even now you can see smoke over there. Does a spit have a practical meaning? Why do Russians need it? It allows them to block the exit from Mykolaiv port. All the ships going from Mykolaiv, Kherson ports. The spit is an entry into the Black Sea. They go on to talk about how they often have to spend time in below the trenches, it's sort of underground in their sort of bunkers, if you like. But it looks really neat and clean and comfortable. He says it's a good bed. It's fine. We just often get hit by Grad's MLRS, and here they're talking about a KH-101 cruise missile that formed a massive crater and a big explosion nearby. I don't think it did any particular damage to anything apart from to a few vehicles and blew out the windows to a building. Anyway, that's an interesting video. It has a few more bits to say. It's just a nice insight into what the operations going on opposite the Kinburn Peninsula. I'm going to now move on to another video that is set in a trench network around Avdivka, not far from the Russians at all, and mainly about this guy who's their commander. It says loads. This is jam-packed full of really fascinating stuff, this video. It talks a lot about how he's younger than some of the people he commands, but they don't mind. He's an expert in military stuff. They might be an expert in carpentry. He had never ordered them around on stuff to do with carpentry. So he is like the expert. Just an interesting look into how age affects command and respect and things like that. But he says when we're not fighting, we're all friends and you know we get on as peers, I suppose, beneath here. But when obviously you need to start commanding and doing stuff, then obviously it's kind of different hat that you wear. Right, let's get into it. So anyway, here he is. He's just about to take a walk through the trenches by one part. It seems to be split into two areas. Have a look at how the trenches are set out and how uh, you know the condition, everything. They look fairly newly built. Again, is this like one for the press because this is a journalist and a nice camera crew because well, a cameraman, but really nice HD pictures from this. Sorry about that. So the unit commander there. So that's what he sounds like, and I'll just mute him and just start that again and read out subtitles to you. So VAR, the unit commander, says the cases are different. The enemy can behave in different ways. If the enemy cannot take us by the quiet method is to sneak up, then he will try the Russian method. The Russian method is just to run. Really, 2 or 3 of them will be exploded, of course, because we've mined areas. 2 or 3 will explode, but I don't know. Maybe under the influence of various drugs, they can go further. And when they come into the trenches, we have dug trenches in such a way that they won't get far in the trenches, because every soldier who is on this position knows his place in different situations. If the enemy entered there, for example, a soldier there, well, Vasil, for example, is there. That is, he knows that he runs immediately to this position to work out. By the way, we're heading there now. He says that that means there's sounds of gunfire. It means that we're heading towards having the fight now. I think that's what he means by that. So obviously the sound's off, but there is gunfire. To continue to work out, that is to cover this area because they can go not only through the trenches but also on top. That's just it. And then there's more sound of gunfire, and they actually move on from here. What's interesting is later on he talks about how there's several things that I'll summarize so you don't have to watch all of it or with me. But he talks about how they build the trenches in such a way that the water sort of is channeled down behind the boards that they have at the side. They don't have any boards at the side here, but in places where they've got boards at the side, underneath and behind the boards, and they're built in such a way that because the soil can crumble with the vibration of explosions and whatnot. So they are constantly having to reinforce them. But it all looks really well constructed, really clean, quite dry. And he also talks about how they hide ammunition and grenades every so often in these sort of little kind of culverts. So that means that if you are under pressure, you don't have to run back all the way to your kind of bunker to get ammunition. You just had to go to these different points, get a few sort of sets of rounds or whatever, and then you're back on it. You're positioned in sensible places that you can take out attackers as they come over or through, and they're just really well defended. He also talks later about how there are three trenches, two for their own usage, and then another trench that is basically mined. And what they try and do is get the Russians when they're attacking to go down the trench that has is mined, and then they sort of explode in there, and it's all kind of booby trapped. Fascinating stuff. So just play this bit in silence. I won't read out. Just so you can see them running. They go to another little trench part. Just have a look at the trenches. Really well dug out. Pretty dry conditions at the moment. Dry leaves there. Uh, just really well set up. Sandbags, boarding comes on to be used in a second as it comes around the corner here. Just a decent bit of trench manufacture, and he talks about how the boarding helps them out with the crumbling soil and the wet. And then inside, you have these sort of little cubby hole. Well, in the bunkers, these little portholes, I suppose, to look out of, and then you can observe the enemy that is actually fairly close. In this section, he talks about even how much spirit the Ukrainian soldiers have, such that when the Russians were attacking, they were so surprised that they were rebuffed, even by people that at the time hadn't used weapons much before. And he said, we did loads of damage to them, and even some of their most famous regiments, well, I won't name them, he says, but we rebuffed them really well, and they just weren't expecting that. And he's obviously very proud of their actions. And he finishes off this little section with, that is, I'm sure that the enemy has no chance against us in close combat because our people are much stronger in spirit than they are, much stronger. And I say this not because I made it up, but I say it because I saw it with my own eyes. This, um, and I think that's really interesting. So that that you can see the enemy really close from there. But that's really interesting that he genuinely seems to believe that they just have the spirit on their sides. Um, and I'll just read this bit to you as well. This is pretty interesting. So on this side where we are, it completely divides. Well, it doesn't divide, but it's located at the end of the forest. And on this side, 20 to 30 meters away, is the enemy's territory. There were moments when the enemy tried to cross this road to run into our forests in small subversive groups, but we had already thought through all these moments earlier and realized that we would let them run into this forest because our engineering means we prepared to meet them. And also, from two positions, there will be a crossfire, and the enemy will not be able to go further than 15 meters after they entered the forest. They will not go further because of the density of the forest, engineering barriers, and dense laying mines. 8 years ago, during my first course, the British put this idea into my head. In war, as in natural selection, there is a victim and a hunter. And people in war are the same way. Either you have the mind of a hunter or you have the mind of a victim. And what is the mind of a victim? The mind of a victim is he will hide, he will be afraid, he will think about how to hide somewhere uh, far away or run somewhere or something else. The mind of a hunter is when you are hunting, you will think, if he runs there, how can I jump out from that side, catch him? Do you understand? And most often, everyone knows very well that if he is a hunter, he will find a victim anyway. Sooner or later, the hunter will find his victim anyway. Then they put in my head such, I do not know, maybe mentality I do not know how it's called, that you should always think like a hunter. Even if it's hard for you, if something, um, sorry, I missed that bit. Even if it's hard for you, if something is pressing on you, look for ways to bypass this whole situation, to jump out from the side, from behind, to catch him unawares. That is, you need to think how to destroy, not how to run away. And I thought that was really interesting. And he goes on to talk about how they have uh, basically the Russians use the same kind of procedure each time they attack, which is they go and send their sappers in, clear out the mines, do all the mine clearing, and then once they've okayed it that it's cleared, then they send in their soldiers. But they're looking at them all the time, and they say, right, their sappers have just finished clearing out the mines. They've cleared out the mines. Let's go before they send in their troops. Let's go and lay a bunch more mines. So they wait for the sappers to go. Then they lay a bunch of mines, and then the Russians think it's all cleared, and then run in and attack and then run into a load of mines. It's just simple stuff like that, which is again, that's thinking like a hunter. Lots of really interesting interviews with different people talking about how they're really solid, the friendship, and they built up a good camaraderie, so on and so forth. Later on, in another sort of bunker, the journalist asked, "Do they send these newly mobilised to the front, to the first line?" Sure, sure. There are other options. The first option is for cleanup. They send trained units, Wagner's forces, Chechens, or someone else. It's hard to fight with them because they know what to do. They know how to shoot and so on. Where this unit, which was the first to storm, stops, the mobilised ones stand and fortify instead, or they go further, and those retreat to be restaffed and to rest so that they have no uh, sorry, they have no direct attack by the forces of trained units from the beginning to the end, because they are quickly running out. So what he's effectively saying here is that instead of having like consistent waves of highly trained troops, they have like, well, sometimes it's Chechens, sometimes it's Wagner's, and they do a little bit, but then then they got waves of mobilized troops who just stand and freeze or fortify or run away, and so that's to the advantage of the defenders here. They're all very brave, but also very stupid, he says, because they go ahead thinking that we're such fools and will not set them different traps. But we set them traps, and then, if possible, we give them the opportunity to take their people back. Then he goes on to show the journalist their blown up shower, or actually someone else does, their blown up shower room that they've built. But sorry, it got blown up by shelling and then they've rebuilt it. And then this sort of kitchen area, just fascinating insight into the lives of these guys who have formed a really close, tight knit group of fighters in this fascinating looking trench network. Anyway, details of this will be in the description below. So moving on, here's an intercepted call between a Russian. The intercepted call presents evidence for the intensification of disciplinary measures among the Russian troops, namely shooting for being caught drunk or on drugs. The location and the military unit discussed in the call are not specified except for 25th Brigade. So it's unsure exactly who it is. I'll again read this out to you.
За алкоголь у нас расстрел, чтобы ты понимал.
For drinking, we have execution by shooting, for your understanding. For our own from the 25th Brigade carry out the shooting. Today, 3 people's legs were shot. Wow. What do you mean, actually shooting? I'm being serious. Execution by shooting, the internal order. If someone smells like alcohol or has a drink, they shoot on the spot. 3 retards got drunk at a position. They were shot in the legs. It's strict here with this. Which is interesting because I talked to you previously in an intercepted call of another group or another soldier somewhere else saying, yeah, all we do is sit around drinking because that's all we can do, type thing. So obviously it depends who your bosses are, who your commanders are. And what now? They are with wounded legs. Yes, they'll be taken to hospital now and then to guard room, which is prison, trial, and then they'll be sentenced. Wow. Then they'll be sentenced. I don't know for how long. 5 to 7 years, maybe. It's not a joke. We're at war, Masha. But if someone gets drunk and comes over and you, Masha, one target at my patrol position shot at me last night. So I had to censor myself because they call each other obviously pretty inappropriate stuff. What should I have done? What do you mean he shot at you? Well, he came up and fired. He wanted to see if the rifle was working or not. Luckily, sorry, they speak really quickly. The bullet went above the C word. I snitched on him immediately. He was drunk and smashed on drugs. Sejoja, I'm in such shock. I'm telling you, here you'll die quicker, not from you crops, Ukrainians, that is, but from your own retards. It's because they recruited God knows who, and they made an order after last night's shit to shoot to kill, not at legs. That's it. Sorry, I had to obviously loads of inappropriate language in there and whatnot. But basically, yeah, they were shooting people in the legs and then taking them to the hospital and then sentencing them. Now they just shoot to kill. Absolutely insane. Here's an analysis by Riba. In recent months, there were 30 large fires have occurred throughout Russia. More than 30 large fires occurred throughout Russia. Some of these fires were accompanied by explosions. Given the special military operation and known Ukrainian sabotage, these events raised suspicion. The Rybar team decided to analyze trends from October to December 2021 versus 2022. And here is the infographic they produced. So in this period, the 1st of October to 23rd of December this year, 36 total fires. And last year, 29 total fires. So Riba then say that the roughly equal number of incidents. Hang on, let's do some maths here. 36, 29. There were 29. There's now 7 more this year. So 7 out of 29 is 25%, give or take, 24 point something percent. That is a quarter, 25% increase this year. That's not roughly the same numbers. They've gone up by a quarter. Unbelievable. It may indicate the typical Russian negligent attitude toward fire safety. However, the significant difference in the area of fires and type of facilities, military and military industrial, may be due to deliberate sabotage. And that's a huge point that they actually do concede, which is actually the types of places that are being burnt indicate that these aren't just random mistakes, that these are targeted fires. Not only that, but there are 25% more of them. But that talks about just these really big fires, and that's if we do trust these figures, right? Because I trust very little about Rebar at the moment. If we do trust those figures, then it still presents a big increase. But then there are other stuff like, for example, this has just happened, which is a locomotive, the third one, a fifth case of a locomotive being set on fire in the last month. So it's not just these massive fires, but these little ones like the commissariat office this morning, like this train being the fifth in a month. The fires are a big problem for the Russians. I'm absolutely positive. Moving on, this subject could take up just an entire video or 10. And this is really to the pro-Russians in my comments threads. And there are several of them. You know, I can name a bunch of them, but the people who are always attacking me for, being overtly pro-Ukrainian. I am pro-Ukrainian, and I am pro-Ukrainian because it's the clearly decent moral position to take. Right? There is no point being I'm going to be neutral. I'm going to sit in the middle here. It's like sitting in the middle during World War II and going, yeah, there's some good people in Hitler's side as well. So I'm going to sit in the middle and just, no, Hitler's the aggressor and has gone in Godwin's law. And I know I brought Hitler into it, but whatever. This is called in philosophy, it's called a reductio ad absurdum. You've got to go to the most ridiculous level to look at the logic of this, which is to say, okay, here's an overtly bad dude doing really terrible stuff. I could be objective and neutral here and just report and not comment upon the morality of this. But I would find that virtually impossible because that absolutely disgusts me, right? And it's the same here. Like what the Russians have done under the command of Putin and the military command is absolutely disgusting. They have attacked, sorry, a sovereign nation, but they have also broken international, you know, law umpteen times. Now, prosecutors have uncovered 54 torture chambers and have investigated over 5,000 cases of alleged torture. Prosecutor General's office also revealed that 855 criminal investigations have been opened into war crimes against children, including 10 cases of sexual violence against children. So, uh, what I want to say to those pro-Russians and like, okay, yeah, I'm pro-Ukrainian because, as far as I understand, the Ukrainians haven't done this. Now, what you'll do is you'll come back and say, yeah, but hear you didn't say anything about these people being shot near Svatova or something. Like, pick out these individual cases, right? Those cases will be horrible if they happened on no matter what side. It will be amazing if Ukraine go through the whole war without committing a war crime themselves. But this is about scale. This is about scale and it's about institutionalized cruelty and institutionalized criminality. It's about part of the doctrine of war that the Russians are implementing. And I've heard interviews recently of soldiers on the ground and commanders. It Zaluzhny that was saying, or Artie Green, one of the two recently saying, it was Zaluzhny, I think, talking about the humanity coming through because we have to be like this. Not only because they'll be found out if they do these terrible things like the Russians, it will come back and haunt them, and actually they will lose support from the international community. So it's in their best interest to do that. But it's also I think they see themselves as just better moral individuals, and the Russians seem to have no problem with doing this. I mean, you just look at that intercepted call about shooting their own troops. So they have no compunction with using violence at any point in time for their own ends in a way that's just completely unacceptable. I mean, war is fairly unacceptable anyway, right? Unless it's defensively. But here I don't know how someone could sit at their keyboard, some pro-Russian keyboard warrior, and go, "Yeah, but what about? What about this?" And it's just pure whataboutery. What about this instance over here? What about this instance? Yeah, you didn't say anything about that. What about this instance? Oh, I didn't see. You're not being very neutral now, are you? You're just pro-Ukrainian, you Nazi. Didn't say anything about these people getting shot. No, let's look at trends here. Let's look at trends. Let's look at 54 torture chambers have been uncovered. How many Ukrainian torture chambers have been uncovered? I'm guessing at, give or take, zero. So 54, zero. Now, there could be torture chambers that the Ukrainians are using, but I can guarantee that if they are using them, they're being very careful about them, but they will be on military assets alone. We have had countless accounts of and that's not acceptable in international military law, of course. But we have countless accounts of the Russians torturing civilians and torturing people that are not military assets. We've got countless accounts of people being tortured to death. Aidan Aslin recently in his report, the British guy that was captured with the Azov and the Marines and the in Mariupol and was eventually released. He was sentenced to death for being a mercenary, even though he wasn't a mercenary. He'd been in Ukraine for like 4 years or something, fighting previously. He was part of the Ukrainian army, and he was sentenced to death. So that was pretty terrible, anyway. And then he was brought. Then he was released in a prisoner swap. And he is saying, yeah, some of my, people around me were tortured to death. And he gives a really harrowing account of the sorts of things that he went through, just repeated beatings, and then being stabbed. But he didn't even realize he'd been stabbed in his shoulder until the guy who had been beating him told him. And he said something like, "Are you a Christian?" And then Aidan, I can't remember what Aslan said, probably something like, "Yeah, I believe," or something like that. He said, "Yeah, but you're not a Russian Orthodox, so you're not a true Christian." And this guy's just beaten him half to death and then stabbed him. Yeah, I'm the true Christian, even though I've done this. It's like, oh, dude, it's all wrong. Anyway, here it just seems flagrantly, it's blatantly obvious that uh, the Russians are the aggressors and the bad guys in this. Really simplify it, they are the bad guys in this. They are committing more war crimes that you could poke a hairy stick at. The Ukrainians are not. They may be committing the odd war crime here and there. I'll be amazed if they weren't. It's an army and they're human, and they feel so strongly about the Russians. I'll be amazed if they're not. But are they shooting civilians in the back of the head? No. Are they? You don't get me listing the entire repertoire of eh, horrors that the Russians have committed. So it just annoys me, these kind of keyboard bots and pro-Russians who go around splurging their nonsense. Just it doesn't wash. Now for a really quick one, which is to say that Tokmak, whereas Tokmak, it's just north of Melitopol, really heavily hit by the Ukrainians over the last, I don't know, month or so. And that's because it is a transport hub. So Melitopol's down here. Tokmak has a railway going through it and all those roads. And I think there's been a lot of troop accumulations, ammunition, warehouses, command and control centers, all these kind of things hit repeatedly. Well, now it looks like there are claims that actually that they are pulling back from Tokmak and sort of sending troops and equipment elsewhere. However, for Tokmak itself, it appears to have been completely defended, or defenses have been built all around it. Um, in the event that it will be attacked. So obviously the Russians are expecting some kind of attack at some point in order that they have done that. Right, to finish off today, I want to refer you to this Ukraine the Latest podcast. They have such good content in there, but this is from a TikTok creator called Ksenia Solodkina, who is from the Crimea, or from Crimea. She so just to let you know where that is, I mean, obviously you should know by now, but there's Crimea. She talks about how the since 2014, this war has been going on since 2014, not since 2022. And in 2014, and even before 2004 to 5, you started having information warfare going on. And she talks, because I often discuss or ask questions about, well, what would happen if the Crimea got taken back over and the Donbass got liberated? What about all these pro-Russians who lived there? And how does this happen? And of course, and I talked about this with the Holodomor genocide, which is that if the Russians are starting to put their own Russian civilians in these places, and then you get sort of generational intermixing, you then start having people who are pro-Russian and their families are pro-Russian, and then communities that start springing up being pro-Russian, even though the Russians aren't doing very nice things or whatever. So, what explains what has happened in Crimea? And I think she talks to this in a really interesting way. So, here's what she has to say.
Overthink. Well, you're probably not even going to think about this stuff until it happens to you, and your reality bubble bursts. But yeah, before 2014, it was just just normal existence.
Can I just ask you to go a bit further there? I mean, you said you see looking back, you see these signs of growing Russian presence and sort of information war. Like what exactly? What did you see?
So this is something that it's hard to talk about without sounding like paranoid person, like like something from a movie. But yeah, there was this growing presence of what I now realize is we'll call them the Russian secret services, call them any other Kremlin affiliated organizations, but it was the gradual soft power spread. For instance, we had the so-called Russian cultural centers in Crimea. The first one was opened in Simferopol, that's the capital of Crimea, because Crimea Crimea had the autonomy. It had its own parliament, it had its own administrative structure. And so in Simferopol was the first one, another one was in Sevastopol, and several years later. So they would organize all of these pro-Russian events. They would invite children, I don't know, they would announce a competition, for instance, like in my case, because I used to write poetry in Russian, a poetry competition would be announced and you would win and you would be invited to this event, given some prizes, have some pictures taken, and then these pictures would be used in the Russian media as a way to express, oh, look at all these Crimean children, look at them posing in this Russian event, and they're probably pro-Russian, stuff like this. Then there were organizations openly recruiting like high schoolers, trying to get them into the Russian universities. And one of the conditions in order to get to the Russian university for free, if you wanted to as a Crimean, was to participate in what I now realize were pretty much like separatist meetings. So, you have to go out and like paint a Russian flag on the fence and, stand next to it while the people who are organizing all this take pictures of you. So it was ridiculous stuff like this. And looking back now, I realize what it was, and I'm thinking, oh my God, how was that allowed? How could this possibly have happened? But yeah, this was unfortunately a part of our reality. And obviously it was not a grassroots movement. It wasn't just people, wishing to enter Russia, wishing to be annexed by Russia. It was carefully orchestrated and organized from somewhere in Moscow.
Can you talk?
Absolutely fascinating stuff. She goes on to talk about so much stuff here. Again, I would just signpost you to this to listen to her speak about it because it's fascinating, and the insidious nature of the battle for hearts and minds, and you end up, she says there that it's not till you look back on it you realize you kind of being brainwashed, and you've got all these sympathies for Russia that have been ingrained in you because actually that there's been a calculated project to get you on board to get you to sympathize for Russia. Absolutely incredible, and that kind of stuff has obviously been going on for years and years now. So all the people in Crimea will have had this. They will have had an information diet from state media that will completely skew their grasp on reality and who Ukrainians are, their fellow Ukrainians, if you like, and what is going on in Ukraine, which is only just down the road. And of course, this will be going on in the Donbass region as well. And all these narratives just drip fed into these guys about how the Ukrainians are Nazis, how, X and Y and Z. Yeah, absolutely fascinating. And then they asked her about, well, how do you feel about the Kerch Bridge being blown up? And she said, I absolutely celebrated because she's Crimean, but she doesn't live there and her family don't live there anymore. So this is another issue that of course, all the pro-Ukrainians in these areas have left because of the Russian occupation and what the Russians have done. So what you're left with is a kind of distilled version of the population that is ostensibly just pro-Russian. What do you do when you liberate these areas? What you're going to be met with in terms of public opinion? But she said she saw the Kerch Bridge go up, and this was such a symbol of like Putin's Russia that she was absolutely over the moon. She's just like, this is brilliant. She's celebrating that this bridge was blown up, and for her it was just a really monumentous occasion. But yeah, just fascinating. I might play you some more of that at some point. But yeah, go and check out Ukraine the latest. And also a really good analysis of the Zelensky visit to Washington too. Anyway, there you go. That's my Ukraine War Update Extra video for Christmas Eve, pre-recorded, even more pre-recorded. Yeah, whatever. I don't know what's going to happen Christmas Day. I might try and see what I can do in terms of producing something. I might not be able to. We shall see. But if I don't, look, Merry Christmas, everybody. I hope you're all safe and sound. Just have a little think, raise a glass or a slice of Christmas pudding or a slice of roast turkey. Raise something to those in Ukraine who are going through all hell at the moment. On both sides, human beings suffering as a result of war, like Russians suffering because they're sent to this senseless war by some idiot narcissist at the top of the chain of command who is condemning his own populace to death in many cases. I think of the Ukrainians and their families. I think of the people without water, without energy, without heat, really cold time. You just spare a thought. And in the meantime, thanks for all your support yourselves, and I will be with you, going forward. Well, it might not be on Christmas Day, but who knows? Anyway, thanks so much. Toodle pips. Big love.